Hello, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak today on such an important issue. My name is Anthony Flores, and I'm the Research Director at Oklahoma Policy Institute. I'm here to provide a statistical overview of poverty and how to reduce it. A bit about my background: I hold a master's degree in economics, and my research focus was on poverty reduction strategies. I hope that by sharing some of these research and insight I've gained over the years, that we can better understand the challenges facing our community and consider effective ways to address them. In this presentation, I'm going to try to address three key questions. What is poverty? Who is in poverty in Oklahoma? And what can we do to get people out of poverty? Given our limited time, I'll only provide a high-level overview of some of these topics, but my goal is to establish a shared understanding of poverty in Oklahoma so that the upcoming discussions can build on that foundation. So let's begin with some shared definitions. Understanding these definitions are crucial to understanding poverty. Often conversations about poverty can be very abstract or philosophical, which can cloud some of our view of the issue and the solutions. And I find that returning to some of these clear definitions helps us stay grounded. So what is poverty? Poverty is not having enough resources to meet basic needs. It's a simple definition, but there's a lot underneath that. In a moment, we'll go over what we mean by resources and what we mean by basic needs. But first, it's important to understand that poverty is not determined at the individual level. It's a household level issue. Resources are shared among family members, so either the entire household is in poverty or none are. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using the Census Bureau's supplemental poverty measure, which is widely accepted as the most comprehensive way to capture poverty in the United States. It considers both income, public assistance, and necessary expenses, providing a clearer picture than older measures, which only consider pre-tax income. Using the SPM, we find that in 2023, 13.1% of Oklahomans, over 500,000 people, do not have enough resources to meet their basic needs. So what do we mean by basic needs? In the Census SPM, they include food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. The SPM calculates a poverty line based on what households typically spend on these necessities, adjusted for family size, household type, and geographic differences. That means the poverty line is higher for a household of 4 than a household of 1, and the poverty line is higher in more expensive areas like New York City and lower in places like Oklahoma. This approach even factors in different living situations, such as owning a home versus renting. It even considers if a household has to pay a mortgage or owns their home outright. It is a more accurate reflection of the cost of living and what it takes to stay afloat. So what do we mean by resources? Here we have this definition of income plus public assistance minus expenses. We add in all that cash income and public assistance and subtract out certain unavoidable expenses. By necessary expenses, we don't mean a coffee at Starbucks. We mean things like taxes, transportation, childcare, and medical cost, things you need to keep your job or to stay alive. This is a thorough calculation giving us a deeper understanding of who falls below the poverty line. After those adjustments, calculating poverty is straightforward. Every household with resources above their poverty line is not in poverty. Everyone with resources below the poverty line is in poverty. So if the SPM is so much better, why do we still use the official poverty measure occasionally, which only considers income before taxes? Because it requires asking less questions, so we can cheaply get a big sample size and get good estimates down to the county or even the neighborhood level. Or in the case of federal poverty guidelines, which you may hear about for eligibility for some of these programs, it's because it makes it easy to figure out if you're eligible for a program or not. So for example, in 2024, if your household has 3 people and your income is below $25,820, then you're in poverty. All I have to do is ask you 2 simple questions. It misses a lot of nuance, but again, the benefit is that it's simple. So why is it that we are using the SPM for this presentation? It's because we are interested in that question about who is in poverty and why. So in Oklahoma, who is in poverty? When we hear that 13.1% of Oklahomans are in poverty, it's easy to think of them as a large homogenous group. But what shocked me many years ago when I began researching poverty was that the image of who was in poverty and the reality were very different. I grew up with the perception that there was this mass of able-bodied adults sitting on the sidelines and just not participating in work, and that these are all the people who are in poverty. Instead, we find that most people in poverty are either already working, actively seeking work, or unable to work for a variety of reasons. Let's break down these people in poverty into different groups. Think of this chart as like a pie chart of the type of people in poverty broken apart into little pieces. So the largest group of people in poverty, about a quarter, are children. Next are adults who are working, seniors, people with disabilities, caregivers, and students. And then all the way on the right, that tiny little bar, is a group of able-bodied adults not working who make up just barely over 1% of those in poverty. Far from being inactive, the vast majority of people in poverty are already contributing to society in essential roles or facing barriers beyond their control. If we think back to our definition of poverty, it can help explain why. Remember that poverty is a household measure. More people in the household raise the poverty line because you need more resources to meet basic needs. But because the people in these groups are often unable to work, they usually don't add any additional work income. So it's common for a worker living on their own to be out of poverty, but once you consider familial dependence, they sink into poverty. That is why households with 2 workers and no dependents have a poverty rate of almost 2%, while households with 1 worker and 4 dependents have a poverty rate closer to 20%. The ratio of dependents to workers matters a lot. We'll revisit this and how to address when talking about what we can do to get people out of poverty, but I do hope this chart does for you what it did for me and change the way you think about what poverty looks like in Oklahoma. This slide shifts our focus to the rates of poverty within each group. We see that those most likely to be in poverty are the ones either least able to work or are trying to work. So the largest group in poverty is actually those who are unemployed at around 36%. 25% of those with disabilities live in poverty, and that's compared to just 6.5% of those who are actively working, who are in poverty. This reflects a broader issue. Poverty is tied to a lack of opportunity and support and not just a lack of effort. Next, we can look at disparities by race. When we break down poverty rates by race, stark disparities emerge. Black, Native American, Hispanic, and multiracial Oklahomans are more likely to live in poverty, with Black Oklahomans facing a rate nearly twice that of their white counterparts. Going back to how poverty is calculated, we can see this is driven largely by those differences in income, making it a critical area for intervention. For example, we saw that the highest poverty rates among the unemployed, people who are seeking work but can't find a job who's willing to take them. In Oklahoma, the Black unemployment rate was 8%, 6.3% for Native Americans, and 3.8% for white people. And even then, once you have the job, you still find disparities within occupations. Educational attainment is another major factor, which will be discussed at length later. Those without a high school diploma are nearly 3 times as likely to be in poverty as those with some college education. This highlights the importance of improving educational access and quality if we're serious about reducing poverty. Many other speakers will go into this topic in more depth. Rural Oklahomans also experience higher poverty rates, 18.8% compared to 13% statewide. The SPM does adjust for the lower cost of living in rural areas, but the income gap is so large that it overshadows those adjustments. Finally, we see a small but persistent gap between men and women. Women are slightly more likely to be in poverty, 13.3% versus 12.6%, driven by lower wages and higher caregiving responsibilities. So, what can we do to get people out of poverty? With a clear picture of the problem, what are our options? In this section, I'm not prescribing things we should do, only listing the options available. Other speakers will get into what we should do. Again, I like to go back to our definition of poverty, having enough resources to meet basic needs, where resources are income, public assistance, and expenses, or minus expenses. So there are really only 3 options. Either one, you reduce expenses, which in this case means lowering the cost of those unavoidable necessities, needing to keep a job or stay alive, like childcare, medical bills, and transportation. Programs that make these more affordable can make a substantial difference, especially for families with a large number of dependents compared to the number of workers. The next option is increasing income. There are 3 sources of factor income, but individuals in poverty often lack significant access to 2 of them. The first is rent through ownership of property of land, and the other is interest and profits, such as through stock ownership. These passive sources of income can be a very useful cushion to stay out of poverty. But those in poverty who work, the most significant factor income is obviously salaries and wages. So increasing income can happen through higher wages, through better job opportunities, or investment in training and education. The last option is public assistance. Notice the most public assistance is often tailored to those groups that we had mentioned earlier. So for people with disability, we have the Social Security disability insurance. For children, we have the child tax credit, EITC, WIC. For seniors, we have Social Security and supplemental security income, SSI. For the unemployed, we have unemployment insurance. For caregivers, we have caregiver tax credits. For students, we have Pell Grants, the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Public assistance addresses the fact that some households have many dependents and few workers, and that statistically, that just ensures a significant portion of them will be in poverty if not provided additional resources. So what public assistance does is it spreads a portion of that cost across a wider portion of society so that households can more easily bear their end of the responsibility. They also provide a degree of economic security in case of unexpected events for which they are not at fault, such as an economic downturn or pandemic causing sudden job loss, or a family member who used to work now developing a disability, or even just entering a new stage of life, such as retirement, having to leave their job to take care of another family member or attending college. Finally, I should note that some programs are more generally available to people based on their income, and not just based off of membership to these groups, such as SNAP, Medicaid, and so it's not always tailored to just these groups. This final chart shows the effect of various programs on poverty. For example, Social Security alone reduces the poverty rate by 8%, mainly of seniors, while medical expenses, if not addressed, increase it by around 3%. If we decide to pursue some of the options described today, we can empirically answer questions like how many Oklahomans would be lifted out of poverty if we made that change. Salaries/wages aren't on this list, but we can even estimate what would happen to poverty if we increase salaries by 10% by investing in education and training. Then we can compare that to the cost of the policy. This is a powerful tool because it makes poverty more concrete and allows us to predict the impact of different policies. But there's a distinction between us showing that statistically a poverty will lift 50,000 Oklahomans out of poverty and making the case that we should pursue that policy because it's the right thing to do. That's the part that we leave to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Pretty impressive how you boiled that down for us. I think we just got your master's in a few minutes, so I'll look forward to hearing more.